Swapnil Bharti, and we are here at KubeCon and Cloud Native Con in Shanghai, China. And today we have with us Dee Kumar, Vice President of CNCF. This is the first, KubeCon in China. What has been your experience so far?
It's been fantastic, and I'm really excited that this is our first KubeCon Cloud Native Con event in Asia. And as you must have heard from the keynote from Dan, that China is not only a consumer of cloud native projects, but now they've become contributors of cloud native technologies.
Yeah, I have also talked to a lot of players, and they are contributing heavily. JD.com, there are a lot of players, so that is incredible. One of the, I think, keystones of CNCF is Kubernetes. What's going on in the Kubernetes space?
So Kubernetes is continuing to rise, and just for the audience, this morning I pulled out some recent stats. So Kubernetes has 100,000 commits, 25,000 contributors, and 85,000 pull requests. And compared to 1.5 million projects, open source projects on GitHub, Kubernetes is number 9 for commits and number 2 for authors or issues. So definitely, I think it's the result of the community's hard work that is helping with Kubernetes getting adopted in production at a massive scale.
When you talk about the adoption, where do you see most of this adoption? We are in China, so.
As you've heard from JD.com, they're one of the leaders in terms of using Kubernetes in production. So I think they've started off initially small, but now they have thousands and thousands of clusters being deployed in production. And just in terms of the overall global economy, there are also leading brands like Uber, Lyft, Twitter, Goldman Sachs, Bloomberg, they're all using Kubernetes at a massive scale in production. And I don't know if you've seen the report from RedMonk. So based on the report from RedMonk, about, I would say, 50% of Fortune 100 companies are now using Kubernetes in production at a massive scale.
What are, as you are leading, and by you, I mean CNCF leading the project, what are your future plans when it comes to not only Kubernetes, but other cloud native? What exciting plans do you have in the pipeline?
So we're really excited that this year we have 2 projects that have graduated. So it's Kubernetes as well as Prometheus. And I think one of the things that I really want to talk about is what is crossing the chasm. And I'm sure you've read the book from Jeffrey Moore. And what he has done is he's mapped 5 segments of technology consumers. And I think what is really interesting is to really look at CNCF as an organization that is not just a bunch of projects and members, but looking at CNCF as an organization that helps move all these open source projects to cross the chasm. And when we say crossing the chasm, is helping these projects go mainstream. And of course, that is demonstrated with the graduation of Kubernetes as well as Prometheus. So we are really excited in terms of making sure that all the projects that are under the CNCF umbrella are moving through the different stages as defined by the 5 segments, and they eventually move and go across the chasm and go mainstream. And then again, crossing the chasm is just the beginning and not the end, because you then start looking at massive adoption and at a really large scale. And that what really helps in terms of crossing the chasm is in being able to prove these technologies are becoming predictable and reliable. That allows for a new wave of new projects to sandbox, incubation, and graduation. So those are the 3 stages that we have defined for the projects in CNCF.
Maybe I have read the book, a lot of people have not. So can you just go a bit deep, not too deep, in explaining what those 5,
Yeah, absolutely. So it starts off with innovators, right? So these are techies who live on the bleeding edge, and they love and they spend hours getting new projects or new technologies to work. And then you have the early adopters who are visionaries essentially, and they take the work from the innovators and then they move the leading technologies through their organizations. And in fact, they take a lot of risk with applying these new projects to business critical applications. And then you have the early majority who are actually pragmatists, and they are just looking to increase productivity with existing operations. And hence lies the chasm, because you have the first 2 segments who want to change and disrupt, and then the pragmatists, they're just looking for continuity. And therefore, the way CNCF helps with this is taking these projects through the 3 different stages, which is sandbox, incubation, as well as graduation. And as you cross the chasm and when you go mainstream, I would say about 1/3 of the users in the late majority, they just want things to work and they don't want to spend a lot of time, that require new skills or new expertise. And so to them, giving something like a managed Kubernetes service is really going to help with the initial setup. And it's also going to help reduce complexity as well as in terms of the other operations that's involved.
When I talk to people and we talked about open source, there are 2 schools of thought. One say open source is a business model. Some say open source is a development model, not a business model. But I think it's it's a complex mix. Like Red Hat says that they are an enterprise company who uses open source as a business model. They don't call themselves an open source company. So from your perspective, because you're talking about Jim's Dumlin's 3 wheels, so give us a bit more insight into those 3 wheels, and what is your perspective on business models around open source or with open source?
Yeah, that's a great question. And I don't know if you've seen this chart from Jim Zemlin. So he has these 3 gears, which is essentially open source projects. And then you have products and services, which is commercial products and services. And then the third is value creation, which is essentially profits. And so I think our jobs collectively here is to get those 3 gears to spin faster. And our jobs at CNCF is to host really good open source projects that then people who work for amazing companies can use, and then they can build and create commercial software or projects on top of it, which then leads to value creation. And then you take the value of the profits and reinvest it back into these open source projects, which is essentially by hiring more engineers, you write more code, which means more improvements. And then that becomes a virtuous cycle of investment, innovation, and economic activity. And this is kind of evident, or it's being demonstrated with Kubernetes. So Kubernetes not only has reached a state of graduation, but I would say that it's become an economic powerhouse for cloud native. And what I mean by that is a lot of other projects are getting created around Kubernetes. And so what that means is it really helps companies build more products and services. So now it's becoming a growing ecosystem of cloud native projects that Kubernetes has enabled. And this is again demonstrated with CNCF now getting more projects. So we have over 25 plus cloud native projects.
A lot of studies or surveys and reports are coming up, that by 2025, almost all companies will move to the cloud. They're moving out of the data centers. But as we move to, or as companies embark on their cloud native journeys, they realize that the challenges are not way too much. It's very complicated because they have to look at their CI/CD pipeline. They have to look at so many things. So how do you plan to help these companies who are about to embark on their cloud native journey?
So that's a great question. So I don't know if you've seen the cloud native trail map from CNCF. So what essentially we did is we worked with the community, we worked with a lot of companies that helped with the vision of the cloud native trail map. So essentially you want to look at it as a get started tool to becoming cloud native. And so what we have done with the cloud native trail map is we kind of used an analogy where you go on a hike. And so this essentially becomes a map. So we are not saying that this is the path that one needs to use. So we've kind of had the cloud native trail map has 10 steps as a part of the overall journey. And again, this is like more of a well-tested path. And what we are saying is this becomes a guide for anyone who's looking to get on the journey to becoming cloud native. And if you're already cloud native, it's still a very useful tool in terms of understanding the 10 steps that we have kind of outlined as a part of the cloud native trail map. And I think just the fact that the trail map is now getting really popular and it's becoming like a single resource that most of the companies are now using. So we as in CNCF, we are very excited to further build on this vision of the cloud native trail map, and we're looking to add a lot more stuff, which is going to be one of our key programs for 2019.
So 2019 is going to be really exciting, year for cloud native journey. But the interesting thing is that as we move to this work, new opportunity. We cannot even predict what this future is going to be, but it's good to see that you have a roadmap or trail map to help companies in staying focused on what they want to do and where they want to go next.
Exactly. And as you know, as we're getting so many projects inside of CNCF, I think it really helps in terms of understanding how exactly do you use these projects. Do these projects work well together, or do you just have to use Kubernetes? And so I think this trail map is just like a starting point, and it's really exciting that we're going to further build on this vision. And I think the other thing that I want to also state is our end user community. So we also want to work with our end user communities. Our end user community is growing, and we're looking to have a lot of case studies or customer testimonials, which we also plan to incorporate as a part of the cloud native trail map to further help companies really understand where to begin, and if you're already on a path, how do you kind of use all these amazing great projects that exist as a part of the overall cloud native ecosystem.
Awesome. Good luck with that, and thanks for talking to us today, and hopefully we'll see you again
Thank you.
at KubeCon Seattle.
That's great. Thanks.